So my plan is just to show some slides and talk about those. I'll try to talk slowly. So I get asked very often what my influences are. And I grew up in a family where we didn't read, well, we read many books, but we're not allowed to watch television. But on occasions, we were allowed to watch an afternoon children's show that would show very bad cartoons. And one of them was called Clutch Cargo. The most disturbing part was it was very, very cheap animation. So they would have a drawing that didn't move, but they would put live mouth in the center there. So you're looking at Clutch Cargo with a woman's mouth wearing lipstick. And I remember having to leave the room on occasion because I was too scared. Another thing I did while growing up was looking at a lot of books. My father was interested in comics, illustration, and this is a particularly disturbing image that I looked at for a long time. A great illustrator, and I'll ruin his name, but it's Boris Artsibashev. I can't pronounce it. And I would, again, a lot of books around our house to look at. This one gave me nightmares. It's a drawing by Daumier. But I was young enough to not have any reference or understand anything other than seeing a child skeleton, a corpse with no head. There was something incredibly horrific about looking at this drawing. Unfortunately, this drawing would come to mind as I was dropping off to sleep. Here's a book, another illustration. I would look through books of illustration. This was 2 pages showing the techniques of folds in men's and women's clothing. What I found most disturbing is that there were no heads in these costumes, so they looked like they were animated clothing. Another thing that, again, I was telling you that my father was interested in comics, and in the late 50s, they reprinted Harvey Kurtzman's Mad Comics in black and white in these paperback books. And again, I had no real knowledge of the cultural references. For example, I didn't know who Wonder Woman was, but I would look at an image like this and see this voluptuous woman in this strange machine. Originally, this was a color comic, so the men with the guns had a skin-tight costume on, but in black and white they looked naked. And again, I was looking at these before I could read, so I would look at all of the stories and the artwork and the atmosphere. For example, this one just is incredibly kind of rich and surrealistic. And these were children's comics, but there's something incredibly disgusting about some of the imagery. It looks like a big shit monster. These were comics that perhaps I should not have been looking at. Another thing, my father was interested in all art forms, but he was a person who approached it as a hobbyist, as a hobby. So for example, he did watercolors, he did sculpture, and he even did comics. So what you're looking at here on the left is a comic from a book, kind of a how-to-do comics book, and on the right is my father's version. So at a very early age, I had the perception that comics were made by hand. They were made with ink on paper. It wasn't that same mystery. I could see how comics were made. Another thing that was very mysterious was a collection, like a notebook that my father had, where he pasted in pieces from clippings from American comics. What I didn't understand was the purpose. If you look at the far right, it's difficult to see, but it says full, 3/4, or 3/8, 3/4, 1/2, 1/4. So he was clipping characters that were at different angles for reference. And at a certain point, he just started filling the pages randomly, even though on the far right corner you can see F for female, standing. So there's standing females. And at a certain point I realized that a lot of the pages were filled with very cute, voluptuous women. So, very early on, my father gave me my first Tintin book, Tintin, by Hergé, which was The Secret of the Unicorn, even though this is the French edition. And they had a very, very profound effect on me. There were only 6 books published in the early 1960s when I was perhaps 5 years old. And there was an extreme frustration because I would look at the end papers, for example, and see characters that looked mysterious and interesting, but I didn't know what those stories were. And on the back cover, for example, I would see, okay, I know Tintin, I know Captain Haddock, I don't know these 2 children with a monkey, and what is this very strange egg in the back that is red and white? And I couldn't understand that. And off in the distance is this incredible island, and I think, I have to read that story, but it was impossible. So naturally, over the years, I've stolen from Hergé and his designs. I think I just absorbed the feeling, the atmosphere, and found that need to express myself that way. Even his end papers. And so here's a short sequence. I'll do this in English. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha ha, admit it. You're scared. Everyone knows the same way. Come closer to the door, come closer. Come a little closer, good. Now look, there's an intercom. If you keep in mind that I can't read, and I have no idea what an intercom is, there was a very strange moment where I thought there was a voice or a mouth embedded in a wall. So here's my entry into the current series of stories. I lived in California in the late 70s, 1977, 1978, 1979. And I was interested about the music scene. I listened to small bands, punk bands. This is a concert I was at a small club. You see Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo on the left. What I liked about this period is it was very early, and the whole punk identity hadn't been worked out carefully. For example, the guy has a leather jacket, but he still has the heavy metal haircut. And the same here, you can see the young, beautiful punks who've worked their look out, but the guy in the center still has the 70s mustache. So I wanted to do a story about the time period that I was in art school and participating in that punk scene in San Francisco. And there were plenty of influences. I was looking at artists who did SX70 photographs, like these are by Lucas Samaras, who was an influence. I did my own versions of SX70s, but they were not on the level of Lucas Samaras, I'm afraid. And I also photographed my friends. I did a series of double portraits with using the SX70. And so some were friends, some were people I knew from bands. This is Winston Tong from the band Tuxedo Moon. Maybe somebody knows the name. This is Carol Detweiler, who is in Pink Section. Also one of my favorite band names, the Inflatable Boy Clams. When I was starting the story about, I had many false starts when I began this trilogy. And in my notebooks, I realized I was writing notes about the punk era, but I was also drawing pictures of a punk with a Tintin haircut. So I just needed an entry point into the story, and the idea of slipping out through this broken hole in the wall was my way of entering that world. And so you see on the right is the protagonist, Doug, who is an art student interested in doing photography, doing performance pieces. He's in art school, listens to punk music, so he's kind of a stand-in for myself. And on the left is the strange counterpart, Nit Nit, or Johnny 23. So I conceived of the trilogy, 3 portions, and 3 different periods of the character's life. So the first is X'd Out in English, The Hive, and Sugar Skull, which I think is just out here. And this is from the title page of Sugar Skull. What I liked doing was having creating a world where there would be an alternative set of magazines at the newsstand. So for example, you would see romance magazines, Mexican wrestling magazines, men's magazines, children's comics. So this is just a short sequence from The Hive. A dream sequence. Oh shit, these are the ones I've been looking for. Sarah's going to love these. But as I look, I realize the image won't hold. It has a life of its own. There's nothing I can do about it, nothing to hold on to. And another thing that I was very intrigued by was looking at, I was finding pirated editions of Tintin. This is a Chinese edition. When I was a child, I was aware that there were French editions, French-Belgian editions that I had no access to, so that there was a foreignness to that. But the Chinese version, where it's been redrawn, takes that foreign feeling another step. And here's 2 other Chinese editions. I love the ears of Snowy Milu. And also this terrible look on Captain Haddock's face with his giant gun. And as you'll see later, I stole this design from one of my books. So to take the idea of that foreign feeling further, I did a complete series of Nit Nit foreign editions, and these are all covers that I created. And some of the imagery corresponds to the 3 books that have been published, but some are completely separate. No explanation. So I was telling you before that I stole the design from the Chinese pirated edition. I did my own book called Johnny 23 using a fake foreign text. And I actually made a foreign typeface, so all the type inside is a foreign text or a fake foreign text, and I published it with a purple ink on a very nice warm paper. For me, it was reminiscent of Japanese comics I'd seen and Mexican comics I'd seen. And another thing that I enjoy looking at are American romance comics. They're kind of, there's a huge market for old comics in the United States, but nobody, or hardly anybody, collects romance comics. And some of them are kind of lurid. The woman saying, "And just what must I do to get those?" There's one story it's called "I Married a Maniac." And I guess one thing I liked about the romance comics is because they weren't about superheroes, they weren't about cowboys, they weren't horror stories. Well, some of the romance comics were horror stories, but they were about the interaction of men and women. And so, of course, I've had to do my version of romance comic covers. These are fashioned after a company called Charlton Comics, and they were the lowest end of comic publishing in the US. I've heard the story that they paid maybe half the price of other comic book companies, but they paid in cash every Friday so the artists could go get drunk. And of course there's many more. I haven't done my lesbian romance yet, but on the right we have a nice gay romance, and even some foreign romance comics. The image on the left was taken straight from an existing comic, which was just such an incredibly bizarre image. I did not have to change much. There's some more. And of course I had to do some men's magazines. This is Sex Decoy. They have subtitles like "Sad Girls with No Future," "Lost, Lonely, and Unloved." And I'll show a few things that I've done very recently. Did a collaboration with Kielhofer, and it's a wordless strip, so I can just show you the slides. Unpublished. And most recently, I had the chance to work in a tabloid newspaper comic that's published in Brooklyn by a friend of mine, using a mixture of two colors. So with two colors combined, you can do this amazing, rich quality of tones and colors. And this is a page that I did just before I came over here. So these are just a close-up, and I'll read it. This is what I'm stuck with: a stutter, a skip, a blurred muttering, the same words, the same images over and over again. Sometimes I forget myself. Sometimes I feel as though I'm discovering them for the first time. They feel new. They come alive for a few minutes, for a few moments. And at other times, it's more like a broken record, a tape loop, an echo that won't stop.